Most people think self-discipline means saying no to everything enjoyable, grinding through boring tasks out of sheer willpower, white-knuckling your way past every temptation. That's not quite what it is. Self-discipline isn't a punishment you impose on yourself. It's the thing that actually gets you to whatever you say you want. And the real obstacle standing in the way of it was never really outside you. It was always the part of your own mind that resists leaving the comfort zone it's already settled into. That's the starting premise of Self-Discipline Mindset by Curtis Leone. The book treats self-discipline as an internal battle first, a set of external strategies second, and it builds its case in a clear, deliberate sequence, one idea leading naturally into the next. It starts with something most people skip entirely when they set a goal: the reason underneath it. Not the goal itself, but the specific, personal why that's actually driving you toward it. Leone argues that without a clearly understood reason, discipline has nothing to hold on to. You can want to lose weight, or build a business, or wake up earlier. But if that want stays vague, it evaporates the first time it becomes inconvenient. Knowing your reason is what gets you out of bed on the mornings you don't feel like it, because the reason doesn't depend on how you feel that day. The book offers a specific way into this. Start by visualizing yourself as the person you're actually trying to become in concrete, specific terms rather than a vague wish. If the goal is losing weight, don't leave it abstract. Decide exactly how many pounds and by when. Picture yourself already living inside that outcome as clearly and as often as you can, until the image itself starts to feel like something worth working toward rather than a distant hope. Then, once the picture is clear, go a layer deeper and ask why that particular outcome actually matters to you. Not the surface answer, but the real one underneath it. The thing that would still matter, even on a day when motivation is nowhere to be found. Leone suggests making this concrete through two simple lists. On one side, write down your goals, the reasons behind them, and the specific benefits discipline would bring into your life. On the other side, write down what happens if nothing changes, the real cost of staying exactly where you are if the old patterns simply continue unexamined. Looking at both lists side by side tends to clarify something that stays fuzzy when it's only a thought in your head. The gap between where you are and where you want to be stops being abstract and starts being something you can actually see. Once the reason is clear, the book turns to the thing most likely to quietly undo it: excuses, and specifically the habit of procrastination that hides behind them. Leone singles out one excuse in particular as especially damaging: the belief that you should only act when you feel like it, when the moment feels right. This sounds reasonable on the surface, but it hands your goals over entirely to your emotions. And emotions are unreliable by nature, shifting from hour to hour for reasons that often have nothing to do with the goal itself. Someone who plans to wake at 6 but decides it's too early, then tries again the next day at 7 and decides it's now too late, will keep finding a new reason at every hour, because the actual problem was never the specific time. It was the habit of letting a passing feeling make the call. Self-discipline, in this framing, isn't about waiting for the right feeling to show up. It's about acting regardless of whether it does, because the perfect moment you're waiting for was never actually going to arrive on its own. there's a practical reason this matters beyond just willpower. Leone brings in research on how habits actually form in the brain, pointing to the basal ganglia, the region responsible for automating repeated behavior. Once a pattern gets wired in deeply enough, you stop consciously deciding to do it. It simply happens. This cuts both ways. It's exactly why bad habits feel so hard to break, and it's exactly why new, better habits, once they're established, eventually stop requiring effortful willpower at all. But that transition point, before the new habit is automatic, requires deliberately practicing decision-making again and again, choosing the new behavior on purpose every single time, until the old automatic pattern finally loses its grip. Leone is honest that this early stretch feels uncomfortable, almost by design. Something like exercise won't feel rewarding on day 1 or day 2, precisely because it goes against a pattern your body is already settled into. The instinct, right at that point, is to interpret the discomfort as proof the new habit isn't working, and quietly slide back to what's familiar. The book's argument is that this exact moment is the real test, not a sign of failure. Push through the discomfort without letting it decide the outcome, and each repetition afterward becomes measurably easier because the pattern being reinforced is finally shifting. To reinforce this shift, the book recommends a specific verbal tool, a mantra, a short, repeated statement built entirely around what you want and who you're becoming, said to yourself daily until it starts shaping how you actually think. Leone's reasoning is direct. The things you repeatedly tell yourself have real influence over your behavior, whether the statement is true yet or not, because your mind tends to move in the direction of whatever it's fed most consistently. Someone who wants to build an exercise habit, but keeps internally repeating that they hate working out, or that it never really helps, is quietly sabotaging the exact habit they claim to want. One small negative statement at a time. Replacing that internal script with something that actively supports the goal, said consistently enough to actually sink in, written down somewhere visible if needed, like a mirror or a bedside table, becomes part of the discipline itself, not a separate, softer add-on to it. With the reason established and the excuses named, the book moves into something more structural, building an actual written action plan, because Leone is clear that discipline without a concrete plan tends to dissolve into good intentions that never quite convert into consistent behavior. Wanting something badly, and even understanding exactly why you want it, still leaves an enormous gap between intention and daily action. And a written plan is what actually closes that gap. The plan doesn't need to be elaborate. A simple table works, tracking the specific action, the time it's meant to happen, what could realistically go wrong, how you'd handle it if it did, and how you'll measure your progress along the way. The goal itself should follow the SMART framework: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Because a vague goal produces vague effort, while a precisely defined one gives you something concrete to actually act on each day. Rather than a general aspiration, you can quietly redefine whenever it becomes inconvenient. Part of this planning process, in Leone's framing, means anticipating your own future resistance before it happens, rather than being caught off guard by it. If you know you're likely to hit snooze and skip an early alarm, the plan should already account for that likelihood. Ask someone else in the house to check that you're actually up. Put the phone across the room, so silencing the alarm requires standing up in the first place. The point isn't willpower alone. It's designing your environment and your systems so that willpower has less work to do in the first place. Once the plan is running, Leone insists on regularly reviewing it, checking your actual progress against what you set out to do, and adjusting where needed rather than treating the original plan as fixed and unchangeable. If the goal was losing a specific amount of weight, that means actually tracking the number on a scale, not just assuming progress is happening because effort is being made and the workouts are getting checked off. Actively engaging with the plan this way does more than just measure results. It reinforces motivation because visible progress, even small amounts of it, gives the mind concrete evidence that the effort is actually working, which makes the next day's discipline noticeably easier to summon. And when the numbers reveal a setback instead, the book is specific about how to respond to it. Failure isn't treated as evidence the whole effort was misguided. It's treated as information, something to examine honestly rather than something to punish yourself over. Self-criticism in this framing doesn't produce better results. It just adds an extra weight to carry on top of the setback itself. The more useful response is to look honestly at what actually went wrong, adjust the plan accordingly, and get back to the specific reason that started the whole effort in the first place. The final piece of the book addresses something that shows up no matter how solid the plan or how clear the reason: temptation. The pull toward whatever the new discipline is actually trying to move away from. Leone treats this as an unavoidable stage rather than a sign that something has gone wrong. Building self-discipline in his framing isn't a smooth, steady climb. It's uneven, full of setbacks, and it develops gradually through repeated exposure to exactly these moments of pull, not through some single decisive act of willpower that settles the matter once and for all. With that expectation set, he lays out several concrete ways to actually meet temptation when it shows up. The first is distance. You already know, better than anyone else, exactly what tends to pull you off course, so the most efficient response is often simply removing it from reach entirely, rather than trusting yourself to resist it every single time it's sitting right in front of you. Someone trying to quit smoking gains far more from clearing every cigarette out of the house, and even distancing themselves temporarily from friends who smoke, than from relying on willpower alone every time a pack happens to be within arm's reach. The second strategy is a deliberate use of visualization, this time turned toward resistance itself rather than the end goal. Picture the specific moment of temptation in detail, and picture yourself moving through it without giving in, repeatedly, until the imagined version starts to feel familiar rather than uncertain. This isn't wishful thinking, it's mental rehearsal, training the response in advance so it doesn't have to be improvised for the first time under real pressure. The third strategy is a direct comparison between immediate gratification and long-term outcome, made explicit rather than left as a vague background feeling. The pull of instant reward, whether it's a snack, a scroll, or a skipped workout, is real, but it's also temporary in a way the underlying goal isn't. Leone suggests deliberately holding the short-term pleasure next to the long-term cost, sometimes by imagining the worst realistic outcome of continuing the pattern, to make the comparison concrete enough to actually shift behavior in the moment, rather than staying an abstract fact you already knew but weren't really feeling. The fourth and simplest strategy is distraction, redirecting attention onto something else entirely, whether that's a task, a walk, or a book, until the immediate pull of the temptation naturally fades. Willpower isn't unlimited, and Leone treats this final strategy as an acknowledgement of that reality. Sometimes the most efficient path through a temptation isn't confronting it head-on at all. It's simply occupying the mind with something else until the moment passes on its own. Every piece of this, taken together, builds one continuous line rather than a set of separate tricks. Know your reason clearly enough that it can carry you on the days motivation doesn't show up. Stop treating your emotions as the deciding vote on whether you act. Build a real, specific plan and treat setbacks inside it as information rather than verdicts. And when temptation arrives, as it reliably will, meet it with a strategy chosen in advance rather than a decision made in the heat of the moment, when the part of your mind that wants the shortcut is the loudest voice in the room. Self-discipline, in this framing, was never about becoming a different, harsher version of yourself or waging a permanent war against your own impulses. It was about closing the gap between who you already say you want to be and what you actually do on an ordinary Tuesday when nobody's watching. Motivation hasn't shown up, and nothing about the moment feels especially urgent at all.